We're going to get started and talk about aerodynamics today. Are you ready?
As I'm gonna be.
Something that's fairly confusing to people, which is...
Bernoulli and Newton's third.
And then drag is created by the shape of the aircraft. So I've talked about the PT Cruiser versus the Ferrari, right? And people get into a stall because they're on final approach and then they see something on the runway and they pull back on the flight control.
Different aircraft stall in different ways.
Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Ground effect. It's a trick question.
A vertical distance half the length of the wing from the runway.
Flaps.
Yep.
What do the flaps do?
I guess it depends, doesn't it? Just imperfections in the design, shape, flows of the aircraft.
Yep. You grab the flight control, you trim the aircraft to the proper speed to maintain altitude, pull back on the control, and then you let go.
Engine out.
Engine out. You got it. Welcome to another episode of The Flying New Guy. And today, as always, we have Jason with us. Jason?
Greg?
And Jason is a student pilot right now who is learning to become a private pilot, and he has a lot of questions. So we do these episodes to kind of create a ground lesson where you get to be terrorized by myself and then ask some questions back. So we're gonna get started and talk about aerodynamics today. Are you ready?
As I'm gonna be.
Let's get to it. Let's get started with something that's fairly confusing to people, which is a stall. What's a stall?
When an airfoil exceeds critical angle of attack.
When the airfoil exceeds critical angle of attack. That's a great answer. What's the angle of attack?
It's the angle between the relative wind and the chord line.
And the chord line, okay. So why is that so important?
So you can increase lift on an aircraft in two ways, speed and angle of attack, and it's a relationship, right? You have a finite amount of one thing, angle of attack. When you hit that angle of attack, you're going to stall. It does not matter if you are supersonic. It doesn't matter if you're 0 miles an hour. Well, I guess it does because you're not generating anything, but...
So what happens at the critical angle of attack that makes a stall?
The flow over the wing becomes turbulent instead of remaining laminar.
Yep, turbulent. So you can see that the airflow is no longer nice and smooth right on top. Then what happens during a stall? How do you know that a stall has happened?
I haven't flown yet.
You haven't flown yet, that's right.
I don't know for sure. I believe, though, from some studies in my degree that different airfoils, different aircraft stall in different ways. Yep. So you have, stalls from the inside of the wing, from the root of the wing towards the wing tips, from the wing tips in, and then you can completely depart controlled flight if you stall too fast.
Yeah, typically on general aviation aircraft, the wing is going to stall at the root, which is where you want it because you want to continue having flight controls using the aileron. So you don't want the airflow over that section of the ailerons to stall. But really in a stall, what's going to happen is the nose is going to pitch up in most cases, pitch up, and then eventually it's going to drop. So the nose is going to drop. It's not as bad as people make it sound like it is. So a lot of people are afraid of the stall. It's also not an engine stall, which I've seen reported sometimes by reporters where they say, well, the engine stalled. Well, no, the wing actually stalled. The engine hopefully never stalled. It's not really something that happens. Okay, so you talked about the critical angle of attack. So it's that angle at which the airflow is no longer going to be laminar in here. Is the speed important for the aircraft? Can you reach the critical angle of attack at any airspeed?
Yes.
Yes.
You can.
Okay. So why do we use airspeed in the aircraft to tell us when we're going to stall?
Because again, it's a relationship, right? Lift is the end goal, right? And a stall is loss of lift. Too slow is also a loss of lift, right?
Yeah, kind of. So the reason we use the airspeed indicator as an indication, in most aircraft, we don't have an angle of attack indicator, which is an actual device that exists.
Right.
So the best indication of a stall is using an angle of attack indicator, but it's not super widespread in aviation. So instead, what we do is we rely on slow airspeed because in most cases, the airplane is going to stall when you're flying at a slow airspeed.
Because you'll be pulling back to maintain your altitude or maintain control.
Yeah, because of a lot of different situations. People get into a stall because they're on final approach and then they see something on the runway and they pull back on the flight control. They're already at a very low airspeed, they pull back on the flight control, or they get into a steep turn and then pull back on the control, which increasing stall speed, we'll talk about that, and then they get into that situation. So that's really the reason why we use low airspeed, because it's usually a great indication of this. But if you were in a fast descent, right, and you pull on the flight controls very quickly, what happens?
You would still stall.
You would still stall because you're relative wind, right, which is the direction in which the aircraft is moving, as you pull quickly on the flight control, the aircraft is still going to continue to do this and reach the critical angle of attack. So you can reach the critical angle of attack in any phases of flight, but in most cases, it's going to be at a slower speed. We talked about the 4 forces of flight in the past. Why are those forces so important? Well, first, what are they?
What are they? Well, you have the iPad, but it's, lift up, you have gravity down, drag backwards, and thrust forwards.
Yep. So weight because of gravity. We have thrust created by what?
Your engine.
By the engine. And then drag is created by?
Lift and the shape of the object.
Yeah, 2 different things, and we'll talk about that in a second. These forces are important. What is the relationship between these forces? Do you remember, like, the important relationship, and in what phase of flight that happens?
Oh, so in unaccelerated flight, they're equal.
In unaccelerated flight, they are equal. In level flight.
Level,
level unaccelerated. The unaccelerated is which forces?
The opposing. So
which ones, though? So there's unaccelerated and level, right?
Well, unaccelerated, from a physics perspective, accelerated is turns as well, and it's straight and level.
Yeah,
straight and level.
So that's going to be your thrust and your drag are equal.
Yes,
that's
thrust and drag, and then your lift and your weight or lifting gravity.
That's going to be your level. Okay. How do we create lift?
There's 2 methods. I'm sure there's more if you really want to dive into it like I have, but the primary 2 are Bernoulli and Newton's third.
Yep.
So Newton's third is every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Yep.
Somewhere on the tip of that wing, that airfoil shape, there's a point where the air basically stops and is just pushing on the wing. And there's a component of that pushes up.
That's a minor portion of the lift.
Yep. And then Bernoulli is pressure difference over the top and the bottom of the wing. So you have a higher pressure on the lower side of the wing, lower on top.
What creates the lower pressure at the top and the higher pressure at the bottom?
It's just the shape.
And the shape does what? You're right, it is the shape. What the shape causes what to do what?
Velocity did increase, and so pressure decreases.
There you go. So the speed of the airflow is faster on the top than it is at the bottom because of the shape of the wing, which Bernoulli says just that, right? The Bernoulli principle is based on that. Okay. So you talked about drag. 2 different types of drags.
Yep.
What are they?
Induced and parasite.
Induced and parasite. So let's talk about parasite drag first, because that's kind of the most obvious for people. What does that look like?
It's just imperfections in the design, shape, flows of the aircraft.
Yep, the shape of the aircraft. So I've talked about the PT Cruiser versus the Ferrari, right, in the course. How does that change with speed? As speed increases, parasite drag, what?
I don't think it changes, does it? I think it increases if it does change.
Yes, it increases. So as the PT Cruiser gets faster,
it just makes more.
That much more drag, right? And then the other one is induced drag. What's induced drag?
It's drag as a result of lift.
Yep. So it used to be called, by the way, some years ago, lift-induced drag. I use that term in the course still because I think it's a great definition of it. Mm-hmm. It's induced by lift. Why? Why does that happen?
And this might be blurring a little bit, but it is the spillage of your pressure differences over the wingtip creating wingtip vortices, correct? That is a large component of your induced drag, is that spillage.
Kind of. So let's take a look at an airfoil here.
Okay.
And I'm going to do 2 airfoils. I'm going to do one kind of a lower angle of attack, right?
Yep.
So your angle of attack would be this line between, what did you say the angle of attack is? It's the line between?
The chord line.
The chord line, what's the chord line?
From the leading edge to the trailing edge.
Leading edge to the trailing edge, right? So something
straight line
like this.
Yep.
And then our relative wind that's coming from here. So that would be kind of right here. This is your angle of attack. Lift, the total force of lift is in what direction? Yeah, perpendicular
to the chord line.
To the chord line. So if we put a vector for lift, we would kind of put it like this, right?
Yes.
Now, if we look at it on the reference point of the relative wind vector, so in this x and y axis right here, right? We can divide our vectors into these two vectors, right? Kind of.
Yeah. Yep.
What's this one right here?
That would be your lift.
That's
what we actually.
That's the vertical component of the lift.
It's the vertical component of the lift. It's what we care about in terms of getting the airplane up.
That's the portion that's very useful to us, right? So that's the vertical component right here. And then this bit right here, that's at the bottom here. What is that?
That would be drag.
That's induced drag.
It would be induced drag or the horizontal component of your lift.
So because of the angle of attack that we have when we fly, we create induced drag automatically as soon as you start creating lift. Now, what is the relationship between the speed of the aircraft? So go back to when we talked about the other type of drag. Parasite drag, the faster you go, the more parasite drag you have.
Yep.
The faster you go, the more or the less induced drag you have?
Less. Because you're not going to be pulling back on those controls.
Because to go faster, what do you do to the angle of attack?
You're going to decrease it.
You're going to decrease it. So you're going to push on the flight control in most cases. So this version that I have right now drawn would be way different than having a chord line that's right here, right? With a big angle of attack, where you would have a total lift right here. And then now you would have your drag, lift induced drag in here, and then your lift right here. So on the right side, slow airspeed, on the left side, fast airspeed.
Yes.
So now, if we were to plot on the X and the Y here, so right here. So if the bottom here is your speed, I'm going to call it V, velocity. And if on the left here is the amount of drag that we create, right?
Okay.
So in light blue here, if you were to do the curve for parasite drag, what would that look like?
It would start up high. Well, it would be linear.
Parasite drag, yeah. So
it
parasite drag is
zero.
kind of something that looks like this.
Okay.
It's kind of a parabolic look. And then as far as our lift-induced drag, it would look more like this. Okay? So we tend to call that DI, and then lift-induced drag, or I do. And then this would be your parasite drag right here. So parasite. What is the point that is right here? Minimum amount of drag. Yeah. What's that speed? If this scale at the bottom here is our speed, what is that? When would you want to use that speed?
Engine out.
Engine out. You got it.
I'm trying to remember. It's your best glide, right?
Yep. The parasite drag and the induced drag is super important. And there's 3 different types of parasite drag, but we don't have to go into that. There is these devices on board the aircraft, secondary control surfaces that are called flaps.
Yep.
What do the flaps do?
They allow you to increase your angle of descent without increasing your airspeed.
Yep. So how does that do that as far as lift and drag? Does it create more lift, left lift? Does it create more drag or less drag? It affects both.
How
does it affect both?
It's going to change your chord line.
It changes your chord
line.
Right?
So you're going to still be producing, I guess it depends, doesn't it?
Changes the chord line. So does it create more lift? Does it change the angle of attack?
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Effectively, yes.
So more lift.
And then it would create more drag as well.
It creates more drag as well.
Right.
So it creates more drift and more drag.
I was trying to work that out in my head, more of both.
Yeah, more of both. That's right. That's right. So what it does is it helps us to take off and land at slower air speeds. It allows us to get into the runway at speeds that otherwise we would be stalling at. It changes the stall speed.
Right.
It affects the stall speed. What about ground effect? What does ground effect do?
Ground effect is those wingtip vortices I was talking about, right?
Yeah. So it gets in there, and what does it do?
So in ground effect, the ground disrupts those wingtip vortices, and so it decreases the overall drag on the aircraft.
That's correct.
So that's why you have that feeling of it wants to float as you
It floats, yeah.
No, and if you're fast, you'll float down the entire length of the runway, right?
You can float pretty far, yeah. I mean, in most runways are pretty long, and so in a GA airplane, it's not that big of a deal. When is it most effective, the ground effect?
Half the length of the wing, a vertical distance, half the length of the wing from the runway.
Yep. So in the Diamond, we have a 40-foot wingspan.
Yes, be about 20 feet.
That ground effect is going to be more effective at 20. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing, ground effect? It's a trick question.
I think it's a bad thing, honestly.
It's both.
Yeah.
It's a bad thing on landing because of...
Right, because you have a tendency to float.
You have a tendency to float, yeah. What about on takeoff? Is that a good thing? Could it be a good thing? Can you think of a maneuver that is used where we use ground effect?
I haven't flown
That's
yet.
Right, you haven't flown yet.
Maybe some sort of like short field.
Yep.
Where you want to get off the ground quick and then you could hang out in ground effect until you could accelerate.
Yeah, soft field.
Soft field.
So short field, you want to get to an altitude as quickly as you can because of obstacles at the end of the runway.
Okay.
But soft field, you want to get off the ground as quickly as you can without necessarily going super high.
Right.
So what you do in soft field is you take off, you get the nose off the ground, you get into ground effect, and you kind of hover on top of the runway as you're moving forward until you have enough speed. Now the downside is, once we get past 20 feet,
if we
ground
don't have
effect
enough,
doesn't help us
if you don't
anymore.
have enough speed, you're coming back down.
That's correct. So you don't have enough speed, hence not enough lift, then you can't get off the ground. So that can be tricky. So you'll learn to do soft field takeoff where you'll get the nose off the ground, you'll get right into ground effect, do that until you get the proper speed, and then boom, then you take off. It's fun. It's quite a bit of fun. You talked about those wingtip vortices at the end. There's a device that can be installed on some of the aircraft to help prevent these wingtip vortices. What is that called?
Winglets?
The winglets, yeah. What does it do?
It tricks the flow into thinking the wing never ends, basically, right? It goes up, and so as you go up, you prevent some of that spillage from going directly over the wing and
reaching, right?
Reaching?
It prevents the lower pressure and the higher pressure from reaching at the end of the wing,
right,
and then creating that
right,
vortices that's in the back. So yeah, they're designed to help efficiency. They reduce drag quite a bit. Do you know what adverse yaw is?
I remember covering it in the course.
It's a tough one.
But I'm pretty sure this is one of those where you said, you're really going to get this when you fly. And so I think that I remember a couple of the terms, but...
So what is yaw? Let's break it down.
Yaw is just a rotation about the vertical axis of the aircraft.
Yep. So the aircraft is rotating around the vertical axis. So when you roll, when you turn the aircraft, let's say we roll to the left.
Okay.
What happens to the speed of the wingtip on the right wing as opposed to the speed of the wingtip on the left wing?
The left wing would turn to the left.
Yeah.
It would decrease in speed, and this one would increase in speed.
That's right. So the right wing is going faster, right? To go to cover that amount. Faster means what as far as lift?
More.
More lift.
Yep.
What does it mean as far as drag?
More.
More drag as well. So as a result, as you roll to the left, that right wing is going to do what? It's going to create more lift, which is going to help you turn, right? But also more drag, which is going to do what?
Slow that side down?
Meaning, yeah, exactly. Meaning what as far as yaw?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you will have a little bit of
yaw to the opposite
direction of your turn.
Of the turn. Adverse yaw. Something that you don't want to have.
Okay.
Okay? Mm-hmm. So that's what it is. So how would you correct that?
A little bit of left rudder?
A little bit of rudder. Yeah, that's right. We talked about wingtip vortices, and sometimes when you follow very large aircraft, you can have issues. What are those issues?
Wake turbulence?
Wake turbulence. So what is that? What happens there?
That is the wingtip vortices from a very large aircraft. I think it was the worst is slow, clean, and heavy.
Yep.
Because
Slow
is high angle of attack.
Yep.
Clean is no flaps, right?
Yep.
Because then that would be changing your cord line.
It creates more, actually.
Right, it's
more
creating more.
Yep. And then heavy
because more lift is required.
Yep.
But you really want to watch out for those in a small aircraft if you're following behind like a 7.4, because it can just throw your airplane wherever it wants to.
Yeah, it'll flip it over, and there's plenty of videos that will show that. What else? So right behind the aircraft, what else can be an issue with the...
It can be blown. So
yeah.
it's a spiral. So it's like an invisible tornado, if you will. And it's generally more horizontal. So it could be like blown into a runway if you are downwind from that runway.
Yep.
Or it can descend onto you, right?
Yep. So it tends to descend, yeah.
It tends to descend and get blown by whatever the winds are.
So there are 4 scenarios where you have to be careful. When you're taking off behind another aircraft that's also taking off,
okay,
and you've mentioned that's easy. So in this case, what would you want to do? If you take off behind an aircraft that's taking off, where would you want to be lifting up?
Before them.
Let's do a quick 4 panel here.
Okay.
So we have our runway right here, and then you have a large aircraft. I'm going to make the large aircraft nice and thick like this. That's taking off right here.
Okay.
Right? Where would you want to lift off?
Before them.
Before them. So if you're taking off, you want to at least stay here. You don't want to enter into this area because we said that those sink. They tend to sink, right? So that's first scenario is you doing this. Second scenario is you are landing after one of these large aircraft has taken off. So we still have the aircraft taking off right here, and you're going to be landing. Where do you want to do that?
You will probably want to be on the ground before you hit where they took off.
Correct. So something like this, at the very least. Again, we're trying to avoid this whole area that's right here. So it's fairly easy to picture it when that happens.
Yeah.
Now, this scenario here is pretty simple to do. These aircraft are going to take forever to take off,
yes,
right? This scenario here is fairly easy to do as well, because you'll need 500 feet, 1,000 feet to take off, and they're going to need several thousand feet, right? And then we have the scenario where we still have our runway right here, and then that aircraft is coming in to land right here. And where would you want to land?
You would want to land past them, past their point of touchdown.
You would want your path to be like this because, again, we're trying to avoid this whole area. Now, this right here is a bit more difficult because they're going to take a while to land, and you're not. You're probably going to land right at the beginning of the runway in most cases. But now you're going to have to be pushed to, past their landing point. So you got to be careful with that one for sure.
And so, question on that one in particular. So you have a large aircraft like a 737 or something like that, or bigger, right? They've got 100+ foot wingspan. So their ground effect is 50 or 60 feet. When they come down and they get into that ground effect, and that ground effect is affecting those wingtip vortices and wake turbulence.
It's not getting rid of it.
It's not getting rid of it. It's just affecting it.
And remember, these also sink. So the ones, as you get closer to the ground here, may not be nearly as much, but these are the ones that you want to worry about. And these you're going to get
and
at the real beginning of the runway, and way far in.
Not that I want to play with that at all. But no, just out of curiosity.
They always say when the wheels touch down on the ground and there's no more real lift created is when those wingtip vortices are going to stop. And then, of course, the last one is that aircraft is landing, and then you want to take off. So you want to get off the ground
after they have landed,
past their area, and that's also going to be one that can be
that you got more think about a little bit.
A bit more problematic because of the distance that it might take. Now, the good news is the controllers know about these, and then at most airports they're going to say wake turbulence, wait, and then they're going to space you out to make it work. Yeah, let's talk about stability. And this is also a concept that's kind of difficult to imagine for people. Static stability versus dynamic stability. What's static stability?
So the way I understand it, static stability is the initial tendency. Dynamic is the tendency over time.
Over time. You got it. That's exactly right. So the initial tendency, why is that important in an aircraft like the one that you might fly?
You're going to want to know how closely you need to monitor it, right? If it's negatively static, so it's going to depart away from whatever your equilibrium point is, you really need to stay on top of that aircraft.
Is our aircraft negative stability?
No.
It's static? No, good,
no.
Right?
Fighter jets, missiles, that kind of stuff, maybe, with advanced computer control, but our aircraft should be positive, pretty much positive, right?
Yes, positive. Up until, and you have to think stability is around all the axes of the aircraft.
Right.
So
yes.
as far as the pitch of the aircraft, let's take the pitch example. It's going to have positive static in most cases. And then as far as dynamic, it's also going to have positive dynamic, because what happens is, and it's easy to test it in your airplane. You grab the flight control, you trim the aircraft to the proper speed to maintain altitude, and then you pull back on the control, and then you let go. Initially, the aircraft is going to go into a climb, and then over time, it's going to slowly come back to go maintain the altitude. And then as far as the turn, this is where, depending on the aircraft, but most of the ones that I've flown, when you go to a very light bank and you let go of the control, the aircraft is going to return to the original position. So positive dynamic. As you get to a steeper bank angle, it might actually stay there. So it might have a neutral.
Okay.
And then
a point of neutral.
At the point where it just stays, and it's just going to stay in that position. And then if you go past that, it's actually going to want to continue rolling. So in most cases, what you'll do when you fly the aircraft is you'll establish into your turn and kind of bring back the flight control, and it's going to stay in that turn. And then to get back, you'll have to turn in the other direction.
Okay.
So that always kind of tricks people in here. But that's static versus dynamic. That was a great way that you explained it. Does the center of gravity have an effect on the stability of the aircraft?
It could, yes.
The center of gravity changes position based on what?
How you load it.
How you load it. Is it along the longitudinal axis of the aircraft only?
No, not at all.
Yeah. It can have an effect, again, on
all three
on different axes. Yeah. More than likely on two, the yaw is not going to be nearly as much, but you'll have that on the bank, on the aircraft that have fuel tanks that get burned, you burn more fuel on one side than the other, then you'll have an effect on the stability of the aircraft. And of course, on the longitudinal axis as well. Okay. Hopefully you learned something from this session. If you have questions, leave them down in the comments, and then let us know what you think, and we'll see you in the next one.